Hi everyone, and welcome to the TAP HR podcast. Today I'm joined by the fabulous David Godden, and we're going to talk about all things employee engagement. So David works for a really awesome employee engagement platform, Thymometrics. So we're going to talk about employee engagement in general, and then we're also going to talk about the platform and how that works. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Trish. It's a very great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Awesome stuff. So let's start off with the basics then. So when we're talking about employee engagement, what exactly does that term mean?
Right. Well, that's a very good question. And to lots of different people, it means lots of different things. I think the way that I like to think about it, I like to sort of boil it down to its essence. And I think that employee engagement is you can sum it up by the emotional commitment, if you like, to the place that you work and the goals that that company is trying to achieve. And I use the word emotional sort of advisedly because everything is connected nowadays, but with employee engagement, we're talking about human beings being connected to a business, being connected to their leadership team and so on. And so that's why I always think about it as that emotional connection to the place that they work. And that can burst out into all sorts of different parts of the business, whether they're connected through the managers that they work with, the pay obviously they get, the benefits and so on. There are lots of different facets to it, but fundamentally I think it's that kind of emotional connection to the company that they work at.
And so if it's centered around someone's emotional connection with the company, what, if anything, do you think companies can do to influence that?
Well, there are plenty of things, and I think some work better than others. I think on its most fundamental basic things like benefits packages and so on, but it's more than that. It's about how the leadership deal with their employees. It's about how, as I say, connected people feel to the place that they work. Do they know what they're expected to do? Do they know their sort of growth path and so on? Do they get on with their team? Do they like the people they work for? Do they understand what the direction of the business is and so on? And I think those things, if they're communicated properly, that's when, again, you can feel connected. It's very easy to become siloed in an organization. You can have your head down, working very, very hard, think you're doing a great job, but actually you don't really know what's going on around you, and certainly from the upper echelons within the organization. So communication and a connection is very, very important, I think, to just feeling that sense of engagement to the company that you work at.
I think that links really nicely with a sense of purpose as well. I think understanding what's going on around you and how your role impacts on that kind of bigger picture and the organizational strategy, I think is really, really important. It's probably one of the things that I've seen in all the organizations that I've worked with to a certain degree is kind of not having that breadth of communication and that feeling of purpose for people.
Right.
And how that affects their engagement.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, as you say, sense of purpose is extremely important. I think if you're just literally coming in, people may be doing a great job, they're coming in at 9 o'clock, going home at 5 o'clock, but if they don't really have a sense of purpose, they don't really understand anything other than above what they're actually expected to do each day, it's not very fulfilling. And if another company comes along and says, okay, I would like you to do that job, but we'll pay you 10% more, you're probably going to go and take it. So there is no connection, there's no bond there with that organization. So I think that's very important to bear in mind when you're if you're new to kind of employee engagement. I'm sure most companies are not, but if you are, then I think communication throughout the organization is very, very, very important. I think one little anecdote that I always liked. I used to work alongside a company that had, when I first started working with them, there were 50 people, very, very dynamic organization. They grew, fast forward 10 years, they grew to 2,500 people. They had an enormous loyal workforce working for them at that time. But the CEO of the company never lost sight of the fact that these were his employees, even though it's very difficult to keep hold of, 2,500 people and so on. What he would do is he recognized that it wasn't possible to speak to every single person on a personal basis every single week. So what he did on a Friday, he would actually send out an email to everybody in the organization, come rain or shine. He would send this email out, and it would just be a little bit of description about what's going on at the top level, something that you rarely get to see in a large organization. But he would send this email out, and it would just have what kind of meetings he was having, what kind of news was on the horizon, those kind of things, little anecdotes and little bits of information, little snippets of information to feel connected to the direction and the culture of the business that he was running. But he always had this little footnote note at the bottom. If you've got any questions whatsoever, anything whatsoever, please contact me. My door is always open. And there was that he always vowed he would always reply to all of those messages and so on. It was that kind of connection that I think we can all learn from that. I think it's that just ability to spread the news across the organisation and keep those lines of communication open. I think that's highly important.
No, I agree. And I think when I'm speaking to leaders and businesses that I go into, I'll always say your people make your business. So you have to make business related decisions. And sometimes that's not a nice thing to do. But equally, don't forget that you get to be at the top of the organisation because of all those other people that are making things happen. So you need to choose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's something that can be not easy, but it can be lost if a company is growing particularly quickly. For example, if you've got a small, almost like a family feel to the organization when you first set up and so on, and then you get all of those well-known growing pains and so on, and it's easy to fall into the trap of employing lots of good people and people to manage those people, but the connection sort of is lost. And I think that's something that very successful businesses don't forget, that they have that connection, and it's all born around the kind of culture, the way in which they build that. That's the basis of the business is built out from ground zero, and I think that is where good organisations can actually flourish in that way.
So we've talked about the connection, the emotional connection that people have with an organisation. That's purpose, kind of communication, and making sure that you kind of treat people fairly. So whilst all of this stuff is obviously very kind of near and dear to you and I, for people who are listening or are new to employee engagement, why is all of that stuff important?
I think, if you're new to employee engagement, there are all sorts of ways that you can improve where you start from, regardless of how advanced you are or whether you're just starting out on that road. And there are plenty of different reports. We've just been reading the State of the Global Workforce report by Gallup, that's just come out fairly recently. The headline is not particularly great. It's pretty depressing reading, actually. It says that only 9% of the UK workforce are engaged, which means that 91% are not engaged. Now, those numbers, you've got to take them with a little bit of pinch of salt, because how do you gauge that? What is an engaged employee against who isn't? But even if it's a large discrepancy there, it's still a very depressingly low number. So, but what the report goes on to say is, by having invested in time and energy and the tools to promote employee engagement, you can reduce turnover by up to 60%. And we all know how much it costs to employ another person. We can lose that kind of IP out of the organization. It's a huge upheaval. It's upheaval for the team if it's a senior member of staff and so on. So if you could do anything to improve the kind of turnover of the organization, that's obviously crucial. Less absenteeism is absolutely as a result of good employee engagement. The Gallup report talks about productivity can be up to 20% increased through just people understanding what their job is, what their role is, and how they can make a difference to the organization, feeling embedded and a part of that, of the company. So there are lots and lots of stats out there. I mean, talking about, if you're just a customer facing person, you may feel like you're a brand advocate for that company. I always think of First Direct Bank. Whenever I phone up First Direct Bank, you always get a person there who's knowledgeable, they're well trained, they're just happy to be on the call. And it's not surprising that they are one of the best customer services companies in this country. So, and that all goes back to this kind of feeling of involvement and engagement within the organization. And ultimately, engagement leads to higher profits. I mean, let's not beat around the bush here. I mean, if you've got people that are engaged and they're productive, the CEO is going to be happy, the shareholders are going to be happy, because you are basically producing more on the bottom line. So there are all sorts of reasons why engagement is important and, well, crucial, in fact, to the success of an organization.
So we've talked a lot about things that are kind of linked to feelings, and I guess things that are quite internal to people. So bearing that in mind, how can companies go about measuring employee engagement and being able to be practical about something that, you know, some people might argue is quite hard for them to control?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you know, if we go back in time a few years, and not that many years, you know, companies wanted to understand how their employees felt, and so they would you know, have a chat. It was probably the first way that people tried to identify engagement. But then that kind of evolved into the kind of annual survey, which we all know and hate, to be honest, which was, you know, good intentions. It's trying to understand how people feel. But as we know, it grew into this amorphous kind of product, which meant that you had all this period between you did, you know, before you did the survey, during the survey, after the survey. Huge amount of effort goes into that. Lots and lots of questions. As an employee, it's quite a disengaging process. So you kind of go through and you answer all these questions, and are they cross-referenced? Are they trying to catch me out here? I don't quite understand what I'm answering. And those, and then after all of that survey is done, then there's that period of time to look at the results, to come up with action plans and so on. By which time the whole company has moved along. So, so more recently, we see pulse surveys coming out, so you can actually more regularly understand how people feel about the place they work. But we felt that wasn't quite far enough, and we felt that having an always-on solution was the best way. You know, if you've got an employee and they feel a particular way, why not let them express their views at that particular point in time, rather than a prescribed date. On this date, you have to come up with a whole series of answers to a bunch of questions. Well, why not let the employee say, well, actually, I've got something to say now. I've got, you know, I feel this way. Why can't I express my views at that point? So we always felt that was the best. The kind of gold standard would be to have an always-on solution that would allow you to express yourself. It's kind of more of an employee-centric world that we live in now, rather than, you know, prescribed employee edicts from above. So why not allow people to express themselves and voice their opinion and their views and so on at a time that is suitable to them?
So I guess my next question was going to be, how regularly do you think people should check in on that kind of employee engagement factor? But you've said that your platform is always on.
It is always on, but I wouldn't say that people should be, you know, expected to provide feedback every single day or even every single week. I mean, obviously, it's up to them to have use the platform as they, you know, as at a time that suits them. So when it matters to them, and we do have prompts within the platform to maybe suggest that maybe after a certain period of time you'd like to provide some feedback, as it were, but that may be once every couple of months, for example. So it doesn't need to be all the time. I think one of the things that people think when they think of always on, they think, well, is that something I'm always going to be working on? Well, no, it's something that's available to you 24/7. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be doing things on it 24/7. So, but as I say, I think that we feel it's the kind of the gold standard to, you know, in this day and age where people should be allowed to express their views. My views may change today compared to this time next week. Well, why shouldn't I be allowed to express those views next week as well as this week? So that's what we kind of built.
I think there's just a piece of managing people's expectations, because we've all spent time, filled out a survey, you put time and effort in, then you just don't really do anything back. Whereas if people hear, yes, the system's always on, and this is what we'll look like in terms of us getting back to you, then I think it's great to have a always on kind of thermometer of a business, for want of a better term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's what we suggest to the customers that we have. You know, you don't have to be, you know, on this 24/7, but at the same time, if somebody is expressing a view, they've gone to the trouble of actually, you know, writing something down or expressing a view, as it were. Then why, you know, you should really be responding to that in a timely manner. So that's, you know, that's really that's what we would suggest in that way.
Awesome stuff. So tell us a little bit more about kind of Thymometrics specifically then. So obviously we've said it's a employee engagement platform. We've touched on it being something that's always on, and that being a gold standard in terms of getting feedback. So how does
Yeah, right. Okay. So fundamentally, it is a survey or a feedback tool. So there are effectively two elements to Thymometrics from an employee point of view. There's a survey there, so it has a series of factors. We call them factors. and our customers can change those to whatever they may be. They can swap them in, swap them out as they see fit. And those factors, we ask for two answers effectively to each of those factors. So if, let's say it's job security or the environment or perks or benefits package or whatever it may be that is the subject matter of the factor, we ask that employees provide two bits of feedback on that. So it's a satisfaction measure. So how satisfied are you with your benefits package, for example? And you can just use a little slider. We don't have any numbers. We don't have any Likert scales or anything like that. As I said right at the top of this discussion, it's an emotion. It's something that is, it's sentiment. So we don't have any numbers or mildly happy or 4 out of 10 or whatever it may be. We just have little sliders that say, if I'm happy about something, I'll slide it to one direction. If I'm unhappy, I'll slide it to the other way. But in addition to satisfaction, we also have a second facet to each of these factors, which is how important is it to you as an individual? And we think that's pretty much missing from just about every survey that's out there. Just because it's a prescribed question that's coming from somebody from above, management, HR, whoever it may be, doesn't necessarily mean that each of those factors are as important to the individual that's answering the question. So by having those two facets, two responses, if you like, to each of the question, not only can we see how happy people are, but also how important is it to them. And so that gives us a much, much deeper understanding of people's views of how they feel about things. So it could be that you may have a great satisfaction around the benefits package, but looking at it from the importance point of view, it's just not that important to people. What's more important is the salary or the perks or whatever it may be. So all of a sudden, and this tends to happen when we after we've launched, we look at, we sit down with the customer and start looking at the data and so on. And without exception, our customers will say, well, we knew about these areas that we needed to deal with, but we had no idea that this was just completely unimportant to people, or this was people were highly dissatisfied with this part of their work life. And so it's very, very revealing from just those two simple answers to each question, the amount of depth of information we can glean. So that's the kind of the survey. And then the second part is the ability to physically type in, say, well, I feel this today. So again, the company can pose a series of questions. It may be one question, how do you feel today? Or it could be, what's the best thing about working here? What's the worst thing about working here? Or whatever it may be, whatever the company would like to ask, they can ask those questions within the survey itself. People can type their messages in there. Everything within Thymometrics is anonymous. So people are very open and very honest within the feedback they provide. And that information all goes into the reporting of the platform. So it's very simple for HR, for leadership, and so on. We encourage more and more leaders to get involved in this, because it's not just about an HR function; it is a business function, we feel. So they can review things, build action planning. You can provide feedback to your employees, maybe segments of the organisation based upon their sentiment. So you can provide that feedback very simply, or answers to that feedback, should I say, from within the platform itself. So it's a kind of we like to think of it as more of a kind of feedback environment rather than purely an engagement view. I mean, obviously, engagement is a big, important part of what we do, but it's that ability, and again, I stress this whole, from an employee-centric platform, it's good to be able to see that feedback in real time, to be able to act upon it in real time. And as an employee, I feel like somebody's listening to me. So, even if it's a ridiculous question or a ridiculous suggestion, it's anonymous, so nobody will know it's me unless I say it's from me. And then obviously that can be dealt with by whomever. It could be assigned to the CEO of the company. The CEO might reply to that message from within the platform. That's really, really great. That would give me a great fill-up. If I was a very young member of staff and I made a suggestion on the platform and I got a response back from the CEO saying that's a great idea, we may consider it, whatever it may be. Again, it's all about that emotional connection to the organisation, and that really certainly helps. So that's the way in which we like to think of Thymometrics. It's not necessarily just an engagement platform; it's a kind of feedback platform.
So, in terms of the system itself, then, do you need to have any special training to be able to understand the results, and what do the results actually look like?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, yes. Like any piece of software, there's a learning curve to understand what it is you're finding. From a user point of view, from a survey user point of view, it's very, very graphic, very, very simple to use. We've just made it intentionally simple because if we're asking people to provide feedback on these systems or these questions more regularly than a pulse survey or certainly an annual survey, then it has to be quick. It's available on a mobile device. It's very simple, very quick slide, save, off you go. So it's very, very simple from that perspective. But there is a depth of analytics that we can provide from a very simple looking survey. We can get really deep into the data side of things, the data driven side of employee engagement. And yes, of course, as a result of that, we do provide training for our customers and so on. But it's really just looking at what elements, because it's a bit like Word or Excel. You end up using 10, 15% of it, or 20% of it, or whatever it may be, or 30% if you're a very good user. But you don't tend to use all of it. So we provide training on the whole of the platform. What we find is that users tend to migrate towards certain reports, certain analytics within the platform that meet their needs. So there may be a dashboard that provides an overview of the company as it sits at the moment. We can then focus in onto maybe some of the heat maps within the platform, which show the kind of spread of sentiment across a particular subject or a particular group of people within the organization. So we provide that training, and then it's up to the user to then obviously use the platform and to find what's most beneficial to them and where they can actually find the information they need to then build the action planning out of the back of the platform. Because it's very all well and good getting lots and lots of nice graphs and nice views over time and so on, but you obviously have to be able to use that data for something. So it's a matter of picking out what are the priorities from the data that you're finding. Is there a certain group of people? Is there a certain factor or certain thing that people are talking about that's most on people's minds? Obviously, with recent times with people working from home, mental health became a big issue, obviously, and people's well-being. Completely the world turned upside down. So a platform like Thymometrics, where it's an anonymous platform, people would express their views if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling lost, unhappy, don't know what they're doing, need a connection to the organization. They can freely speak through the platform to do that. So as I say, it's how you use the platform, but it's also what you do with the data as well, which we can kind of provide best practice on and some guidance. So yeah, that's what we like to do with our customers once they've launched.
One of the other things I was going to pick up on is where you talked about how you've got set factors within the system, but also you can amend it. So when I previously used Thymometrics within an organisation, we had them tailored to a certain other annual survey that I won't name. Throughout the whole year, we were looking at how we were doing against those factors, rather than, as you were saying, to the annual one and just kind of hoping and praying that everything was okay. And the nice thing was, it was a real kind of active part of our management meetings. So at every management meeting we had, we were looking at the different factors, looking at where they were, looking at the comments, and it actually became a really lovely active way of keeping communication going. So I think that's a really lovely benefit of the system.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and that's very good to hear that you're using it that way, and that's certainly the way that we see the use of our platform going. Certainly, I mean, we always felt when we first launched that it was kind of an HR platform, but we are seeing that very much more being pushed into management meetings, into sales meetings. So we can give access to any person within the platform that is designated. And they can use those figures for all sorts of whatever's beneficial to them. We get them to display the figures up on a wall, and they can, as you say, kind of review how they're doing on certain factors this month compared to last month or last year or whatever it may be. So, and as I mentioned earlier on, it's although we're very much in the HR space, it really is a business tool. It certainly can have a really positive effect on productivity and all of those things. And so therefore it should be brought into the arena of business management and so on, rather than just purely sitting within HR. Because HR, are busy doing lots and lots of other things. They shouldn't be sitting there necessarily responding to every single thing that's coming in via the platform. There could be, things that, the sales guys could have been speaking to customers and they've got a great idea for the platform, or it could be the marketing guys would like to make some suggestions, but they're not quite sure how it will look, so they might want to do a poll to see whether what people feel about this. So there's all sorts of ways that you can draw the platform into other parts of the organisation rather than just sitting within the HR function.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think employee engagement, whilst it's probably on HR's radar a little bit more than departments, it's not the responsibility of HR to manage everyone's employee engagement, because if it's about that emotional connection that people have with the organisation, well, you're probably only going to see your HR team when you need them, or when they're business partnering, whereas you see your line manager and your colleagues more frequently, and that all kind of into and encompasses part of employee engagement anyway.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right, and that then kind of sort of then moves into the culture of the organisation. So then you're looking at the bond between yourself and other the business as a whole. I know that sounds very grand, but you can feel that kind of connection. It's I always think of the employee engagement is kind of the glue that sticks the employees to the organisation, to the leadership, and so on. And the culture is the way in which that is promoted, and the way in which it's born out of the idea of the way in which the organization would like to see itself, would like to promote itself, and and so it's all about that connectivity, communication, and connection.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And not sure if I should ask this, but I'm going to anyway. Tell us about maybe some of the customers that you have. Obviously, I know you can't tell us about the results or anything, and I wouldn't want you to give away any trade secrets. But what kind of customers do you have? That might be a better question.
Yeah, no, we've got a lot of users around the world. So it's a kind of global platform. As it's a cloud-based platform, so therefore, wherever you happen to be on the planet, you can use the platform. But we've got Redgate happened to be one of our customers, the Met Office, the National Physical Laboratory, who do really great things. Check them out, NPL. The UK Space Agency. So we're on the G Cloud 13 that's just been launched. So the government and public sector website, so we can be found there and so on. But really, it's we although we do tend to sit in certain sectors, it's something that any company of any size should be considering. I don't mean just purely Thymometrics. I mean employee engagement as a whole. And I don't think there's any kind of limit or lower limits in terms of, we've got some customers that are very small, maybe 20, 25 employees. Obviously, anonymity becomes a bit of an issue when you're getting down to low numbers and so on. But they're still getting a lot of value out of the platform, and then up to the thousands of employees like the Met Office and so on, who have many thousands of employees. So it's not a size issue. It's basically just purely and simply, do you want your employees to be able to be connected to the organisation? So that's where we were born out of that whole philosophy.
I suppose that leads in nicely to another question. So a lot of the companies that I work with now are SMEs, so they might have 10 employees, they might have more.
Sure.
Should companies be thinking about employee engagement when they're small, or is that something that they should be thinking about when they're bigger and when they're growing?
Certainly starting when it goes back to that sort of analogy I made earlier on with that company I used to work with, where the CEO, when he had 30, 40 people working for him and ended up having over 2,000 people working for him. It's something that should be considered. Maybe there's not a huge amount you can do, because obviously there's a lot of activity going on with an SME, with a very small company and so on. But certainly having the bones there, if you like, of an employee engagement strategy. So how are you going to employ? How are you going to look after your people? Provide them with that outlet, that voice that they should have, because as you grow, as I mentioned earlier on, if it's a fast-growing organisation, some of these things it's very easy to get left behind, particularly around communication and making sure people feel connected to the organisation and so on. So I think thinking about this thing early stage is a very important thing to really consider, and it could be a very small little strategy you've got around how you deal with that, but something that's flexible enough to sort of grow with the organisation. And certainly that's one of the great things about Thymometrics is we do have some tiny companies, some SME or even micro companies, up to enterprise size companies. So it is something that you should have something that's flexible enough to grow with the organisation.
And time for the killer question. So we know it's important. We know it's really good. We know we need it. But how much does it cost? Is it expensive?
Oh no, it's not expensive at all. We always think of it as it's like a cup of coffee per employee per month. So basically, it's £30 per employee per annum, not per month. That would be an expensive cup of coffee. So £30 per employee per annum, plus a one-time setup fee. So but that includes everything. That includes the training, the setup of your account, the ongoing account management. We actually provide support for every single employee, so not just the admins and HR and so on. So me as a user within a company, I can email support@thymometrics.com and I will get a response. We like to sort of take some of that work away from the HR function and management function. So we just deal with, people want to know about anonymity, for example, or it could be, I forgot my password or whatever it is. So we don't want that to sort of have to be a burden upon HR or others. So we provide that service. So that's all included in that kind of one-off setup fee. But as I say, we try and keep it very simple. The pricing is not, there's not, we don't nickel and dime you for extra bits that we add onto the platform. It's just purely a nice, simple license fee. If you add people during the year, we'll just add it as a pro rata price rather than, trying to get clever with the pricing. We're simple people. We just like simple pricing. We like a simple platform. And it seems to resonate with people. So hopefully that's not too much of a shock to people, but I think that seems to be a reasonable price, and certainly our customers are seeing a return on that investment very, very quickly. If nothing else, just through less turnover. So if you can save one person, it pays for Thymometrics for a year. So it's a no-brainer, I'd like to think.
I feel I need to point out for our listeners and watchers that I had to let my dog in partway through the podcast, snoring in the background, so I don't have a person snoring whilst David is speaking. The dog is
It's fine. I'm surrounded by cats, and I'm sure one of them's going to walk into screen in a moment, so don't worry.
All right. So, if people are interested in using Thymometrics, how can they get in contact with you?
They can, just go to thymometrics.com. We have on there's a page where you can sign up for a free account. If you're a little tiny company, you can actually get a free account. But just email me, david@thymometrics.com. Very happy to respond to any inquiries at all. As I say, if you don't want to do that and you want to go to our website, you can do so and sign up for a free account. As I say, no obligation to buy anything at that point, or you can just sign up to get a demo. Very happy to give you a little demo on via Zoom or Teams. And again, no obligation, but love to be able to talk to people about their issues, and hopefully we can resolve some of those for them.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely.
Thanks, Trish. Great to talk to you. Thanks very much for your time. And looking forward to speaking to you again.
Fabulous. And just for listeners and watchers, just so you're aware, obviously everything in the podcast is for guidance only. If you need to get any legal advice or support, make sure that you do. And all of our standard podcast terms are available on our website. Right, so I've done the legal bit. Speak to you soon, David.
Cheers, Trish. Speak to you soon. Take care.